18th year at Purdue University. We all see lots of coverage in the media of fashion shows with slender young ladies strolling down the runways modeling ladies' clothes, but we rarely see any coverage of what's going on in the world of clothing for men. So I think Joel has a very interesting program for us, and I should point out that he is not yet a member of a service club, so be on good behavior and welcome him back. Joel?
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for having me. I always love to come and speak to different groups. Some of you, I think I've met before at different organizations, and some of you may have even seen this particular lecture before, but hopefully if you have, you'll learn something new regardless. So this is a lecture that's derived from a class that I teach, which is called Social History of Dress, Why We Wear What We Wear. And the thing about clothes is that we put them on every day, something wears out, we go and buy something new, but we don't often think about clothes and how they really are a way to measure what's going on in the world and reflect the world that we live in regarding politics, social change, and so on. So if you want to understand a culture, there are really three things you can look at. Look at the music that they listen to, look at the food that they eat, and look at the clothes that they wear. And so oftentimes I'm called on to speak to women's organizations about women's clothes, and that's all well and good, and I enjoy that, and I know that. But it's always fun to look at men's clothes as well, because men oftentimes don't think very much about the clothes they wear. They wear what they like, they wear what's comfortable, and they know they wear a suit for this and casual clothes for that. But when you start to really look at the history, you can learn a lot of really interesting things about the evolution of Western civilization. So why do we wear what we wear? If you think about it, it usually breaks down to these four categories. It's the technology and economics that are available to you. How are clothes actually made, and how much does it really cost? And what does your clothing say about your access to resources? A typical $60 shirt that you might buy at Macy's costs about 5 cents to make. So it's a huge markup. When you get something on sale, even when it's 75 to 80% off, the store is still making money. And so a lot of clothing has to do with our access to resources. We display our resources or our opinion about our resources by what we wear. There's politics in society. How does the current political and social environment affect the outward appearance of those involved? When society is very restrictive and very conservative, it's reflected in clothes. When it's much looser and much more free-thinking, it's reflected in clothes. And that pendulum swings back and forth, and you'll see that a little bit in the PowerPoint today. Your aesthetic options, what colors, textures, decor, silhouettes are popular and why, and who makes these decisions? When you go to the mall, the Tippecanoe Mall, someone has decided what clothing is hanging on the racks. Who makes those decisions, and how do we have access in our town to certain clothing options that are different than you can find in Chicago or New York or a smaller town than ours? Someone is making those decisions for you. You are not always in control of that. With the internet now, you actually have access to more than you did at one time. It was only what you could buy at the store or what you could order through a catalog. Now it's a little bit different. And the last thing is image. How does clothing indicate individual personality or membership in a group? All right? We could look at this group and we could look for a collective aesthetic, which might be different from your aesthetic at your church or synagogue, or might be different than your aesthetic at your workplace. Every group has a recognizable aesthetic that they subscribe to, whether you know it or not. And I always have students who say, well, I wear what I like. I don't listen to what anybody else says. Not making a choice is making a choice. So you cannot escape a choice. So we're going to look, as our example, at men's suits. Men's suits are something we're all familiar with, but they didn't just spring forth one day in the form that we know them now. They have a very measured and metered history that reflects what was going on in the world. And the ancestor of the modern suit goes all the way back to the 18th century, really the beginning of the 18th century, about 1715 is when we start to see it. A suit or suite of clothes, a matching set of clothes, was a novel idea that started in the 18th century. Only the very, very wealthy would have had matching sets of clothes cut from the same cloth. You know, pants wear out before your coat does. And so oftentimes, even if you had a set made of the same fabric, the pants would wear out first. And so oftentimes things didn't match. This idea of a matching suite or suit of clothes is a fairly modern idea in the history of mankind. So how did it evolve? And the answers, we look at technology and economics, politics and society, aesthetic options, and image. So let's go back to the 18th century. What we think of as the clothing worn by, say, the founding fathers of America, like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, it's a French invention. It's called a habit à la française, or a French suit. All the components that you see there are the components that we still have in a modern three-piece suit. This is when they started. You've got a shirt with either no collar or a detachable collar, a lace jabot, which is a scarf that wraps around the neck. It's the ancestor of the modern necktie. Stockings and garters, because this is still the time of knee breeches. We don't see long pants come in until a little bit later. Fall front breeches, because this is way before the use of zippers. And so your front of your pants literally are going to button, and there is a fall or a flap that opens down. A long waistcoat and an unstructured skirted coat that just hangs from the shoulders with buckled shoes. When it all matched, it's called a ditto suit. Now, they didn't have to match, but if they did, it's called a ditto suit. Hair is usually styled with pomade. That's pomade made from animal or vegetable fat. That is set with powder, usually rice powder. Or later in the period, or actually earlier in the period, a wig is worn. There's very little tailoring. You know, you think about a well-tailored suit, it wasn't about the fit. Everything just hung from the shoulders. The idea of tailoring doesn't come in until the next period. It's all about the emphasis on quality of the fabrics and the applied decor. This is when France was the supreme arbiter of taste, and so it was all about luxurious fabrics to separate the haves from the have-nots. And so you would find the best fabric you could afford, the most luxurious fabric, and have your garment made from that. And this system starts in the late Baroque, but it's really a Rococo or 18th century system. But all of those parts and pieces we still have today. And I'm going to get Roy in a minute. I'm going to get up and examine his coat. And you'll see all the little hangers-ons from this time. They're still there. They're still there. They're like a phantom image on your television. Now, you all know that the French Revolution happens at the end of the 18th century. So the last thing you want to look at the end of the 18th century is French, because it was bad for business and bad for life to look French. And so everything that was French went out the window. Instead, people looked across the English Channel, and they looked at the kind of egalitarian world of the English country squire. And so we go from urban styles to rural styles. And we look across and we see, look at the wonderful life these English country gentlemen are leading. Let's look like them. So everything that was French went out, and everything that was English came in. And so now it is called a habit à l'anglaise, which is an English suit. They replaced those urban styles. You still have a shirt, a jabot, fall front breeches, but now you might have ankle length, what are called pantaloons. Eventually that's shortened to pants. Pantaloons that go all the way down into some riding boots, because these aren't a bunch of aristocrats standing around the palace. Now they're out riding horses and walking. Walking becomes a very popular pastime. A short waistcoat, because if you're on a horse all the time, you don't need a long waistcoat. You need a short waistcoat, and that's why modern vests are short. And a fitted cutaway coat. Cutaway so that you don't have all that fabric in the front while you are pursuing your gentlemanly pursuits on your country estate. Out goes the wig, out goes the pomade. The wigs are seldom worn. English tailoring that emphasizes fit over decor. High quality wool becomes the preferred fabric. You're starting to see hats like tricorn, 3 corners, 5 corners, 2 corners, a variety of small brimmed high crown styles, all suitable to wear when riding. It's interesting to note that military uniforms of the Napoleonic period evolved from the rural attire of this time. And in the English and French honor guards, we still actually have Napoleonic costume with us today. So from this English suit, we get military wear. And this military wear evolves out of English country clothes. And there are a lot of these elements that hang on in modern suits today. And I'll point those out in a moment. Now, in the early 19th century, which is the Romantic period, a lot of this changes. This is a period of poetry and German music and Romanticism and Expressionism. And it is a period where women's clothes are very dainty and doll-like. And it's a very emotional period. The value of emotion and the value of outdoors, of the natural man. And so, in a strange contrast, men's clothing becomes very feminine in appearance, with a pinched waist, a very full chest, very full hips, tiny, tiny feet, and tiny, tiny mouths were very popular for men and for women. So what you see is the cravat becomes very high, so high in fact that, and they were so starched, sometimes if you turned your head really fast, you would cut yourself under your ear. We still have fall front pantaloons. Oftentimes men would pad out their hips and pad out their chest and pad out their calves because those were the sexy parts at this particular time. And if you had skinny calves, what are you going to do? You got to pad them out. We've got claw hammer coats, beaver fur top hats. This is the time when beaver fur becomes very popular, and we all know about the fur trading, especially in America in this period. A lot of it is for top hats. Trousers, waistcoats, and coats seldom match but coordinate, so we've abandoned that idea of the ditto suit. Round-shouldered, wasp-waisted, full-hipped, the ideal male mimics the ideal female in shape. Some men did wear corsets, but most men would just lace up the back of their waistcoat. And everybody knows if you've worn a vest, it has that little buckle and strap in the back. That is a hangover from the 1830s, lacing a waistcoat up the back to firm in and pull in your waist. And so sometimes we make that buckle do a lot of work, that little tiny buckle. But that's the purpose of that buckle, is to smooth in your vest on a three-piece suit, and it's a hangover from the 1830s. Shoulders, neck, chest, hips, and calves, sometimes padded to achieve the desirable effect. This is a short-lived period, and it eventually evolves into the next phase of the modern suit, which is the late 19th, early 20th century. Now you notice that photography has been invented, so now we'll see some actual photographs. Now you might notice that this gentleman is of a certain size. That's because access to resources in this period made the fashionable silhouette for a man to be portly or heavy, because that showed that you could, that showed that you had the resources to sit down to a full meal and eat as much as you liked. And so if you think about the men from the Edwardian period, they tend to be very full through the middle, because that was sexy, because that said to potential partners, this is a man who can provide for me. He is fat. He clearly has access to money and food. And so this whole idea of being thin, being in, doesn't come until the 1920s. So, and then it's ruined it for the rest of us. You've got a shirt with a removable collar, so all of you that can reach up and pull on your collar and it doesn't come off, just know that that is a development that we see starting in the 1920s as well. Before that, your collars came off so that they could be laundered and pressed separately. You've got trousers now. Pantaloons are gone, and what we think of as modern trousers have come into fall. The fall front breeches are gone, and they're being closed with buttons. The idea of zippers comes in around the 1920s. They're being held up with braces. You've got a straight edge waistcoat that cuts straight across, and you've got lapels on your waistcoat and on your coat. And this is the period of the frock coat. So the coat, which was long, now has a seam in it. It has a seam right here, and it's cut with flare, and that is a frock coat. The frock coat is really the coat of the late 19th, early 20th century. You've got fashionable silhouette, barrel-chested and portly. Thick waist indicates adequate resources. Just know, though, this is the last time in history, right before World War I, where grown-ups are the dictators of fashion. Because after World War I, we start to see the youth culture start to evolve, And they are the ones that start to generate fashion, not parents down to children. It starts to go children up. We are wearing watered-down versions, all of us in this room, of things that have come up from the youth culture rather than the other way down. But it was reversed until very recently. That's a beaver hat. You can tell by the sheen. It may even be a collapsible beaver hat. Now, this is what is the acceptable late 19th, early 20th century. This is the time of the Industrial Revolution. This is the time of the rise of the working class. And not everybody could afford clothes like this. So what we see next in this same period is the sack coat or sack suit. And that is the ancestor of our modern suit coats. So anybody that's wearing a suit coat today is the descendant of the sack suit. It was less formal, less mature, more juvenile, often worn by younger men, especially working class men. Considered lower class, it was favored by the middle and the working class. But eventually there are more middle and working class than there are upper class, and the sack suit takes over, and it relegates the frock or skirted coat to an outdated symbol of the aristocracy. And so if you want to think of the modern suit coat, it is an egalitarian item, and then it's saying, we reject you, aristocracy, and we say power to the middle class. So it's a middle class garment, even though today you don't often see suits being worn by the middle class at work and so on. It's also changed. Now, the early 20th century, the teens and 20s, we're now firmly in the modern era. Standard attire is still the three-piece suit with a shirt, and now you've got a necktie. The sack suit is now the actual more fitted set of accepted clothing. In the 1920s, early 19-teens and the 1920s, shoulders are slim, suits fit naturally, trousers are rather slim and very short to modern eyes. Very, very short. Shoulders become wider and trouser legs become fuller and longer as we move through the period. It's narrow, it's youthful, it's athletic and energetic because people start to play sports for recreation in the early 20th century. For the first time, most clothing is store-bought, ready to wear rather than made to order or homemade. You know the whole idea of having creases in your pants? That showed that you bought your pants off of the shelf because they were folded up and put on a shelf. Rich people don't have creases in their pants because their valets iron them out. People who are middle class or poor people, they have permanent creases because they bought them off of a shelf. So having a crease said something. Now we think a crease is a good thing and we iron the crease in. But back in the day, it was the complete opposite. A man was still not dressed without a hat, no matter his economic circumstance. So we still are a hatted time, a hatted period. Checking my time to make sure we stay on track. Some other illustrations from this period. In the 1930s, it's still the basic components, but everything becomes quite wider and bigger and more padded out. This is all going to change with World War II. All of this fabric is available because despite the Depression, textile mills are developing their technology and fabric is getting cheaper and cheaper. So we're able to actually have wider and bigger silhouettes. Here's some other illustrations. In the 1940s, we know that we have fabric rationing. It's not nearly as severe here in the States as it was in Europe, but in Europe it was quite severe. And you see a lot of changes that happen after World War II because of that rationing. Suits become more slim. The vest is no longer a requirement because that takes extra fabric, and so the vest goes away. Cuffs on pants start to go away. Everything becomes leaner and more slender because of that rationing. So here are some other examples from that period. Boxy, square look, no vest on the right. In the 1950s, a two-piece suit is standard attire for all men for business and semi-formal attire. This is the age of travel. It's the atomic age. Men need suits with lean lines and wrinkle-free fabrics. So shoulders, everything gets more narrow. Everything gets, the lapels, the neckties, everything is narrow. And pants actually start to sit at the hips. And now can be held up with a belt instead of braces. So instead of your pants being up here, they start to move down onto your hips. Color and pattern of your necktie becomes more important because you see a lot more of it now that you're not wearing a vest. Increased prosperity after the war means that most men can now afford multiple suits rather than just one, and can have different clothes for different times of the year. So look at the 1940s versus the 1950s. All the exact same components, but in a much sleeker, slimmer silhouette. Now, in the 1960s, everything changes. It's civil rights, counterculture, women's liberation. You've got fashions responding to this forward-looking rather than the past. It's the space age. It is, we start to see traditional suits are even more narrow, but we also see a different options for very progressive men. We can see this double-breasted coat made out of unexpected materials like velvet or brocade, for example. I don't know if any of you had a suit like this. They were available. Now, it's the death of the hat in this period because when it became acceptable in the 50s and 60s for men to wear their hair longer, out goes the hat because after you've spent all this time on your hair, the last thing you want to do is put a hat on top of it. Hats have actually come back in as popular now because men are wearing their hair shorter. The 1970s was a decade of contrast. You've got the social revolutions of the 60s continuing to develop, then you've got the disco era, the bicentennial. Technology is changing our lives as we start to see the beginnings of the computer age. Men's suits like fashion adds flair. Everything has flair to it. It literally flares at the hips and at the waist. And so you've got a reinterpretation of traditional styles, but then you've also got double knit polyester, which has come into play. It is the leisure suit, which was supposed to change all of fashion, and you can wear this from the boardroom to dinner at night to the discotheque. And we know that had a very short life, and ladies, don't be too superior because there was a female version as well. This is the period of unisex clothing. Men are equal to women, women are equal to men, and they should also be able to dress the same. This is when we start to see unisex clothing take off. In the 1980s, it's the Reagan years, and we start to see a throwback to those values of World War II. And so we see the suit reinterpreted in this 1980s fashion. The power suit is what's the most popular. Two-piece, double-breasted, black, navy, or gray wool, pinstripes, large shoulders, lot of drape, and the ubiquitous red necktie.
Unless you're Democrat.
And then, that's true. In the 1990s, we're about to enter a new millennium, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where the world is going, and anytime the society is unsure of itself, it reflects itself in fashion. So we see oversized, deconstructed suits, soft sloping shoulders, oversized pants, and the return of the vest, a desire for comfort, security, and times past. So the suit of the new millennium is fitting fashion for a world that does not know where it is going. Now here we are in the early 21st century. We've got a revival of optimism, but uncertainty in politics and the economy. There's a revival of interest in the aesthetic of the 1960s, a neo-modernism look that looks back to this crisp spade-age style of the Kennedys. Men's suits are lean and fitted. If you go to the stores right now, you can find these suits right alongside more conservative styles. Everything's a little shorter, a little tighter, and clearly influenced by the 1960s. And those of you that are Mad Men fans, you know that television show, it's done a lot to popularize these very sleek, slim, short, literally short in the sleeve and short in the pants, modern suits for men. It's a little dark there. But you can see there's the cast of Mad Men. These are all contemporary suits, and look how short they are and how tight and fitted they are. And this is all the throwback to the 1960s. So this is where we started, and this is where we are now. All the same components, all the same parts, but each step along the way is a reflection of the time in which we live. That was a super fast survey, so I hope you got some good information. And I think we might be at time. We have 3 minutes for questions. Do you have any questions? Anything I can answer for you?
Let's see Roy's suit.
Oh, yeah. What I want to show you is, so, come out here in front with me. Now, if you look, if I pull this up and I close it, what you'll see is this is the same cut as an 18th century suit. There's the collar, and this would come over just a little bit and it would button. All that men did was just open it up, and it was, with English country clothes, they wanted to open it up and be more comfortable. But if you take your modern suit and just close it, it's an 18th century cut. It's still there. Other things that are there are these buttons, which serve no purpose. Those are left over from the cuffs of an 18th century coat that would open up and fold back and then rebutton. And so those are left, and you would see quite a bit of the shirt the shirt sleeve that would pull out. So that is still left over. And then if you look here, this pocket, when it was a frock coat, there was a seam right here, and it was the first time that they put a built-in pocket to the coats. Before that, they were mostly patch pockets. And so when they let go of the skirt and they took the seam away, they kept the pocket. So pockets are where they are, and mostly when they're welt pockets as opposed to a patch pocket, that is left over. And then, of course, the vents that are in the back of your coat allow you to sit down in a chair or still ride a horse. But all these things are still built into your suit coat. Thank you. So, one more question?
What about the width of the necktie?
Necktie widths tend to fluctuate, and they tend to be in proportion to the rest of the suit. So if the suit is long and narrow, the neckties tend to be long and narrow. And like in the 70s, when they were super big, late 60s and 70s, the width of the patterns and so on got quite wide, the flare of the leg, and so the neckties got quite wide.
But I heard you say 40 people had white ties
They have more space to cover, so they could have white ties. And there was one more question.
A while back there was a fashion where you wear a suit coat and blue jeans.
Yeah.
What was that trying to
That's because blue jeans are the great equalizer. And I could do a whole lecture just on blue jeans. Blue jeans are, or were, I'll tell you, they became a neutral. And what it was saying is that presidents often, or potential political candidates, will often appear wearing blue jeans and a cotton shirt with no tie. And that's saying, I'm one of you. I'm one of the working people. The people that started wearing jeans were mine workers and people that worked in agriculture. And so they are appropriating that by saying, see, I'm just like you, and I wear this. So someone in business that might, for casual Fridays, wear jeans and a sports coat is saying, I'm business and I'm casual, I'm just like you. It's like a mullet. When you were, remember mullets where you were business in the front and party in the back? Well, it's the same thing. A lot of times we try to appropriate both the business world and the working class man into one outfit.
Good.
No watch pockets.
What's that?
No watch pockets.
No watch pockets anymore. I don't know if we have time for any more questions.
Go ahead.
One more.
You have a question, sir?
When I first came to Purdue, I would never show up before a class without a coat.
Exactly.
Today, you can see anything.
Well,
Explain that in your terms of your sociology, your politics, etc.
when did you start at Purdue?
63.
And so that was in the 60s was the beginning of this cultural shift, this cultural revolution. But, you know, especially academia tends to follow a little bit behind, at least as far as traditions and so on. So the way professors would dress or the way students would dress in the early 60s is very much what we would think of as the 50s. It was still fairly what you would think of as socially conservative. But then all the changes, the cultural revolution of the 60s start to affect that. And teachers said, well, I don't want to be up here. I want to be down with my students. And so the students changed and the teachers responded. I'll tell you that if I had my way, the professors, we would dress a lot more formal because it's very difficult to tell the students from the teachers sometimes. And there's a certain amount of respect that is lost in being the same. And clothes help to differentiate. When I first started, I'll tell this very quick and then I'll be done. Well, when I first started as chair of Purdue Theater, I'm going into my 4th year, but when I started my first term, I was a faculty member who'd become the chair. And so I wanted to make sure people knew that business was different. And so for the first 3 years, I wore every day a 3-piece suit and a bow tie. That was my uniform, 3-piece suit and a bow tie every day. Once I was reelected for my 2nd term, I was like, all right, I'll relax now. And I usually wear cardigan sweaters and so on. But that said something. And sometimes I wonder if I should go back to my 3-piece suit and my bow tie because it really does communicate a different level of respect and so on. But it always goes back to who's in power and what are you saying about power. And power stopped being a popular thing to have in the mid to late 60s and early 70s. And it wasn't until the 80s that being powerful was fashionable again. So it all ties in. Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
That has been a fascinating look at our culture. Joel, we want to give you a little remembrance from Kiwanis, a little flashlight that you can use to find your way around backstage during some of those theater productions.
Thank you very much, and I will use this. Thank you.
And take the Kiwanis material I gave you with you and read it. His comments about padding trousers and whatnot in the 18th century bring to mind a situation which we had at Purdue in the band department many, many years ago. Remember that Al Wright was director of bands for many years. His wife Gladys sort of took a very possessive role of the majorette corps. And occasionally we would get majorettes who came in rather slim-billed and rather flat-chested. And her favorite phrase was, "What God has forgotten, you fix up with cotton." A quick look at upcoming programs. 3 weeks from today, March 26th, we will have Dave Bangert here from the Journal and Courier. That should be a stimulating presentation. Bring lots of questions with you. 2 weeks from today, we will have Tom Mitchell from the Athletic Department talking about the do's and don'ts of recruiting college athletes. And this should be fascinating also. Next week, we have Dr. Richard Kozier, Dean Emeritus of the Cranner School of Management, talking about the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. A very worthwhile program that Purdue is sponsoring, and I think you'll find it a fascinating presentation also. Gail?
Thank you.